Shalom Aleichem and welcome back to our Shirin Sfas Emes, Parshas Boy Tavshin Peivav. This week on Thursday night, Friday, Hey Shvat will be the Yartzheit of the Heilige Sfas Emes, Chus Yagan Aleinu. At Tzaddik, we've been Zeicha, ready to learn from his Torah for a few years now, every single week, to go out and to delve into the deep waters of the Heilige Sfas Emes, and I felt that maybe it was Kedai this week, instead of learning a piece of Sfas Emes, to learn a little bit about who this Sfas Emes was. It's something that we've never had the chance to discuss, to give a little bit of the context, a little bit of the history to who exactly this Sfas Emes was. And although we do not have a lot written about him, there are no biographies written about the Sfas Emes, but we do have bits and pieces of information, and I thought that maybe it was Kedai to go out and discuss a little bit about who this Heilige Tzaddik was, to give us some of the context necessary to be able to understand the depth of the Torah that we've been learning, and to Mitzvah Hashem to continue to go out and be makasher ourselves to this Heilige Tzaddik, to allow us to continue for many, many years to come in Mitzvah Hashem, learn the Torah and the Avodah of the Heilige Sfas Emes. To begin, the story of the Sfas Emes begins really with his grandfather. Those who have been hearing these shiurim and learning the works of the Sfas Emes know that the Sfas Emes will time and time again, multiple times, generally throughout a parsha, quote his grandfather. Adoni Avi Zikni, Aleph Zayin. Adoni Avi Zikni is a Rashi Tevis that you'll see time and time again throughout the works of the Sfas Emes, quoting his grandfather, the Heilige Chedusharim, the one who began the world of Ger, the one who began the Chassidus of Ger, was the Chedusharim. And the Chedusharim tragically had 13 children in his life, and all 13 of his children were nifter b'chayev, or nifter during the Chedusharim's lifetime. A terrible, terrible tragedy, something that's unfathomable to imagine what that's like, to have 13 children and all of them were nifter b'chayev. Only one of his children ended up living long enough to go out and to bring children into the world. And obviously that was the Sfas Emes, his father, Binyomin, the son of the Heilige Chedusharim, who was beloved to his father not just because of the fact that he was the only one that survived, but he was a very, very special child. They say that the Heilige Varka Rebbe said to his Hasidim, he said, you're jealous of Rabbi Binyomin, you're jealous of the son of the Chedusharim, that he has a father like the Chedusharim. He said, I'm jealous of the Chedusharim, that he has a son like Rabbi Binyomin. That's how much he was machshiv. This Heilige Tzaddik, Rabbi Binyomin, the father of this Sfas Emes, was known to be a tremendous ovid, somebody who was careful about every word that came out of his mouth, which was obviously a midah that his son, who's obviously the Sefer is appropriately called Sfas Emes, because the words of the Sfas Emes contain with it tremendous truth, and his father was the same way. Every word that the Rabbi Binyomin said was weighed. He sat, he thought, he didn't just speak freely. He sat and he thought and he contemplated what he was going to say. This of Binyomin was a tremendous, tremendous tzaddik, and as we said, the lone surviving son of the Heilige Chedusharim. Unfortunately, this tzaddik, Rav Binyomin, got sick as well. He was married once, he had a daughter, his wife was nefteres at a young age, he remarried and had 3 daughters, but yet was still not zeicha to bring a son into the world, and was lying on his deathbed. At the age of 30, at the young age of 30, the 13th son of the Heilige Chedusharim was lying on his deathbed. Terrible, terribly sad for the parents of Rabbi Binyomin, terrible tragedy to now be thinking that they may lose their 13th child, their final child that survived, and the Chedusharim comes into the room of Rabbi Binyomin and tells him the following thing. He says, you have a chiyuv of ubacharta b'chaim, to go out and to choose life. And he says, I'm atzavi you to go ahead and be b'chaim, to fulfill this mitzvah saseh, and to be able to get back up, to become completely healed, and to bring a son into this world. And Rabbi Binyomin heard this tziva, this command from his father, the kibbut of aim that he had, to be able to listen to his father, and ubacharta b'chaim, and a short while later, miraculously, he was capable of getting up, getting completely healed, and eventually be zeiche to bring the son, the Heilige Sfas Emes, into the world. He named his son, when his son was born, he named his son Yehuda Leib, naming him Yehuda because of Apam Eidas Hashem, thanking the Rabban Hashem for the tremendous miracle that he had, that he was capable of surviving when he was already lying in his deathbed. And that was what his name was called at his birth, as we'll see shortly. His name changed to being Aryeh Leib, but at the beginning when he was born, his name was Yehuda Leib, and they called him Leibela. That's what they called him, Leibela, and he was a beloved, beloved child by his parents, and a beloved child by his Heilige grandfather, the Chedusharim. Unfortunately, from the time he was young, his father was very, very ill. His father was constantly, even though he had healed enough to be able to get back up and to be able to have a child, but he was an ill person. He was somebody who wasn't really capable of going ahead and fully taking care of his child. And his grandfather took tremendous care of him from the time he was young. At the age of 8, the Heilige Sfas Emes, his father, was nifter. His mother was nifter when he was even younger than 8, but at the age of 8, he became orphaned from both of his parents, left with absolutely nothing. The Chedusharim had lost all 13 of his children b'chayav. Rabbi Binyomin, the only child that was zeiche to bring daughters, and the son, the Heilige Sfas Emes, as Yehuda Leib, into the world, was nifter as well and the Heilige Sfas Emes moves in to live from the time that he's 8 years old to live with his grandfather. And this way he's brought up by his grandfather physically, spiritually. He's brought up and raised by his grandfather, and is the apple, obviously, of his grandfather's eye. Here's the one lone surviving child who's capable of bringing a son into the world, his only grandson in the world, and he's tremendously beloved by his grandfather. But from the time that he was young, it was clear that he wasn't just his favorite grandson because he was the only grandson. There was something very unique and very special about this child. At the time that he was 8 years old, the Heilige Chedusha Rim hired a Melamed. He hired a teacher for his grandson, the Sfas Emes, and he made with him the following three conditions, which if you can understand and think about what these three conditions must mean for an 8-year-old, you're able to understand that the Chedusha Rim wasn't asking for things that were unreasonable, but obviously this was an 8-year-old, which these three conditions were obviously reasonable for this Melamed to be able to fulfill with this 8-year-old child. What were the three conditions? Condition number one was that it was necessary to wake up this child before dawnbreak, before the morning, before Alois Shachar, to wake up this child early in the morning to begin learning with him. Condition number two was that every day this child needed to go ahead and have a chiddush. He can't just be chazering, just be learning what it says in the Gemara and the Rishonim, but he needs to come up with something, a chiddush on its own. That was number two, a condition that for an 8-year-old child to be unheard of, for a typical 8-year-old child, but clearly this child was a child prodigy, clearly a tremendously gifted child, and the Chedusha Rim understood that this was something he was capable of. And third, perhaps even the most shocking out of all three conditions, was that he needed to learn a minimum of 18 hours a day. Something that for most adults nowadays is almost impossible and very, very hard and very far and few between people that are learning for 18 hours a day. But Chedusha Rim understood that this grandson of his, this 8-year-old grandson, the Heilige Yehuda Leib, this Leibala, was capable of learning for 18 hours a day. And that was the third condition that he made with this Melamed, giving us a little bit of a glimpse into the greatness of the Sfas Emes from the time that he was a little child. His grandfather, the Heilige Chedusha Rim, was a close chassid of the Heilige Katzker. And he took his grandson on more than one occasion to go see his Rabbi, the Heilige Katzker. And once on one of the trips when he was taking him, he was a young child. And once somebody stopped and asked the Chedusha Rim, why are you taking this little child? It's freezing cold outside. You're taking him in this wagon, schlepping him all the way to Katzker. What's the purpose? He can't understand the Torah that the Heilige Rebbe is saying. Why are you going ahead and bringing him to Katz when he's such a young child, putting him in such danger, especially as the only grandchild that you have? Why would you do it? And the Heilige Chedusha Rim said it's worthwhile to bring him there, so at least once in his life he has the capability to see an Emes Yid. We know that in Katz, the main Nakuda, what Katz focused on tremendously was the Nakuda of Emes. And as we said, the Chedusha Rim had that Nakuda. His son of Avamart had that Nakuda. The Sfas Emes, obviously, as a sefer is appropriately named, the Sfas Emes, he also had this Nakuda. And the Chedusha Rim felt that it was Kedai to schlep his grandchild in the freezing cold winter to be able to go out and bring him, to at least allow him to get a glimpse of the Heilige Katzker. And the Chedusha and the Sfas Emes really said that glimpse that he had, those few times that he was capable of going out and seeing the Katzker, went ahead and had a tremendous impact on his avodah for the rest of his life. But that was what he did, and that was what he was capable of, going ahead and being brought up by his grandfather with this Melamed, being brought up in a way that he was given the tools and given the capability to be able to rise and to be able to utilize all of his kaiches. At the time that he was 13, he got married to one of the Hasidim, a daughter of one of the Hasidim of his grandfather, the Heilige Chedusha Rim, and this man that he got engaged to his daughter, his name was Rabbi Yehuda Kamener, his name was Rabbi Yehuda, and the Chedusha Rim told him that since it's a tzava from Rabbi Yehuda Chassid that a father-in-law and a son-in-law should not have the same name, he told him to change his name from Yehuda Leib to Aryeh Leib. Yehuda is compared to an Aryeh, Gur Aryeh Yehuda, and therefore the Chedusha Rim told him, change your name from Yehuda Leib to Aryeh Leib, and therefore from then on his name became Aryeh Leib, no longer being known as Yehuda Leib, but now his name became Aryeh Leib. In the few years after he got married, he was capable of sitting and learning Bahasmada. He was able to sit and to learn and to focus completely on going ahead and involving and immersing himself in Torah and Avodah. His wife had a store, and that's how they would be able to support themselves, but he was able to go ahead and immerse himself 100% in going ahead and being involved in Torah and Avodah. At the age of 19, the next tragedy takes place to the Sfas Emes. His grandfather, the Chedusha Rim, is nifter. And now he's left with nobody else in the world. His parents have already been nifter years ago. His grandfather, the one who brought him up, the Heilige Chedusha Rim, is nifter. And at 19, he's married, but he's left, aside from his wife, with nobody else in the world. And there was a tremendous push from the Hasidim of the Chiddushei Rim to have this Sfas Emes, even though he was only 19 years old, to go ahead and to take over his grandfather and to continue to lead in the Hasidim. And Ger wasn't a small little Hasidus, it was a massive Hasidus with thousands of Hasidim, and yet, nevertheless, they were able to look at this young boy, this 19-year-old teenager, and say, he's the one that we want to go ahead and to be the Rebbe. There was only one problem. The Heilige Sfas Emes refused to go ahead and become the Rebbe. He said, I'm not worthy, I'm not ready, I'm not interested, and he refused to become a Rebbe. Instead, he went ahead and made himself into a chassid of the Heilige Chanech Alexander, the Heilige Alexander Rebbe. He went ahead, who was close confidant to his grandfather Chiddushei Rim, and he went ahead along with many of the other Hasidim and Ger, and he went ahead and he was mevatel himself. He acted as a chassid to the Heilige Alexander Rebbe. The problem was that a short while later, at the age of 23, the Alexander Rebbe was nifter. And this time the Hasidim were not going to go ahead and let him get away so easily. This time, after 4 years of waiting already for him to become the Rebbe, the Hasidim started to push, and they really did everything they could to go ahead and to force him and to get him to go ahead and to accept being Rebbe. And as much as he pushed back, and as much as he said he doesn't want to be the Rebbe, nevertheless the Hasidim made it clear that they had chosen him at the young, tender age of 23 to be the Rebbe, and ultimately this was the time in Taf Reish Lamed Aleph that he went ahead and he became the Rebbe. Sfas that year already, there were thousands of people that came ahead to be able to go ahead to act by him as Hasidim, to treat him like a Rebbe, and he understood that he was no longer capable of holding off the masses. He was no longer capable of going ahead and just being a Chassid. He understood that now his avodah and now his job was to go ahead and to become a Rebbe. And therefore, in the year Taf Reish Lamed Aleph, that's what he did. He became a Rebbe, somebody who was given over to his Hasidim 100%, somebody who cared for his Hasidim. He would set aside time to sit and to listen to his Hasidim. And although in the way of Ger, everything was short, everything was sharp, everything was done in a very, very short amount of words, without lengthy conversations, nevertheless, the Hasidim understood that they had a Rebbe who cared about them, they had a Rebbe who loved them, and they had a Rebbe who wanted to go ahead and help them in any way he could. The Heilige Sfas Emes said once, he said, you don't need to be a Rebbe to be able to go ahead and to help somebody who's a chayla. Often people would come to the Heilige Sfas Emes like to do to other Rebbes and ask him to go ahead and to give them a bracha, to go ahead and to daven to their Banisham that they should get better. And when they would get better, the Sfas Emes would say, it's not because of the fact that I'm a Rebbe that I'm capable of going ahead and davening for them. He said, any Yid that's able to feel the tsar, able to really feel the pain of another Yid in the oimik of his leiv, in the depths of his heart, has the ability to be able to go ahead and help somebody else who's sick. He said, maybe I'm capable of feeling it in a better way, but it doesn't mean I'm a Rebbe. It's just I'm somebody who's capable of really feeling the depth of the pain of the person who's sick, and that's why I'm capable of going ahead and answering them. But he was capable of going ahead, and again, as we said, thousands and thousands of Hasidim coming to him for all different types of eitzes in avodah, eitzes in parnasa, eitzes with people that were sick, going ahead and asking him and learning from him and gaining from him tremendously. Yet even though he had thousands of Hasidim coming to him on a regular basis, the Sfas Emes had hours and hours a day where he would spend learning. One of the hallmarks of the world of Ger, one of the things that Chiddushei Rim began and was continued with this Sfas Emes and continues till today, is the idea of learning, the idea of going ahead and putting in hours and hours of Torah. And as the Sfas Emes said, how can I go ahead and answer any of the shalos that are coming to me if I don't know Baal Peh, all of the Dalet Chelkei Shulchan Aruch? If I don't know all of Shulchan Aruch by heart, how can I go ahead and answer somebody a shalat they ask me? Maybe there's some halacha in Even Ezra or Choshen Mishpat and Or Chaim in Yoreh Deah that is negah to the shaila, and if I don't know all of Shulchan Aruch Baal Peh, then I'm not capable of answering the shaila. Sfas Emes spent hours and hours a day sitting and learning and sitting and being involved in avodah. Yet even though he was a Rebbe, and even though he had thousands of Hasidim, and he could have gone ahead and supported himself the same way many other Rebbes at his time did, either by having the Hasidim go out and give him money, or at least to be makabel pidyonis. That when people came with a kvittel, they would give money, and that would help support the Rebbe. The Sfas Emes refused to take money from anybody. He refused his whole life to take money from anybody, and he as well went ahead and gave advice to his Hasidim that if they became Rabbanim, if they became into positions of power, never to take money, to go ahead and not to utilize the Torah as a way to make parnasa, but to go ahead and to have things on the side, to be able to have ways to be able to make parnasa. That's what this Sfas Emes did. He had a store at one point, different stores, at one point a tabak store selling tobacco, but he had a store that his wife would run, and he would ensure that he was not reliant on anybody for his money. That allowed him to be able to go ahead and to treat all of his Hasidim equally. There were no Hasidim that were treated better because they had a lot of money. In Ger, it didn't make a difference whether he had money or didn't have money. The people that were Ovdim were able to be treated in one way, and the people that weren't Ovdim were able to be treated in another way. It was based on how much avodah you put in, based on how much the Sfas Emes understood. You wanted to attach yourself to the world of Ger, to the world of the Sfas Emes. It was not based on money, and the Sfas Emes was capable of doing that because of the fact that he was not tied down and not going ahead and being supported by anybody. He was able to go ahead and to take care of himself and refuse to take a penny from anybody else. It goes so far that the Sfas Emes said to some of his Hasidim who had stores, when the Rebbitzin would go ahead and shop in the stores, they would want to give the Rebbitzin a discount. If she's not going to take them for free, at least going to give the Rebbitzin a discount. This is the Rebbe, and the Rebbitzin who's buying stuff for their house, they would want to go ahead and to give things at a discount, and the Sfas Emes would say, absolutely not. He would say, you think that you're doing me a favor. He says, you're putting me in tremendous, tremendous harm's way. Me and my children are going to be in harm's way if you go ahead and give us money. We don't want to receive anything from anybody. So much so that the Sfas Emes said one point where one of his children got sick, and he asked the Rebbe, said, did you take money from anybody? And she thought about it, and she said, yes. There was recently somebody gave me a discount on something. He said, go give the money back. It's because of this that our son is sick. He understood that the ability to be able to go ahead and be totally independent, to live on his own, is ultimately what allowed him to go ahead and to be able to survive and to be able to thrive in the way that he did. This is the world a little bit, the background of the Sfas Emes. We can talk for many, many more hours about who the Sfas Emes was and what his Avodah was, but this is the world of the Sfas Emes. It's maybe important to speak out as well, that if you look at the Svarim of the Sfas Emes, you'll find that there's two different sets of Sfas Emes. There's the regular Sfas Emes, which is generally where these shirim are taken from, the regular Sfas Emes, and then the Sfas Emes of Likutim. The Likutim are the words of the Sfas Emes that he wrote prior to going ahead and becoming the Rebbe. In the years after he got married, in the years that he was sitting and learning, those are the Sfas Emes Likutim. They're generally much more shorthand than even Sfas Emes is, even though Sfas Emes is generally written in a very short way. But the ones on Likutim are written even more shorthand. They're maybe a little bit more esoteric. They're written on Zera Kaddish, they're written on Midrashim. They maybe are harder to understand. But that was a Torah that he's writing for himself prior to becoming a Rebbe in Tafresh Lamed Aleph, prior to giving over Torah. That was the Torah that he wrote by himself, and that's the Sfas Emes and Likutim. The other Sfas Emes, from the year Tafresh Lamed Aleph, going through 35 years that he was the Rebbe, those are the Torah that he said by the Tish, those are the Torah that he said by the Sudis, those are the Torah that he said over on Shabbos. Now it's clear, if you look at Sfas Emes, you'll see that Sfas Emes didn't write down these Torahs, he didn't prepare these Torahs prior to Shabbos, but it was all written down after Shabbos. Often you'll see in the Sfas Emes, he'll write something down and says, I don't remember everything else that I said. I wrote down as much as I remember, I don't remember everything else. Or things are a little bit confused from what I wrote it down. It sounds like he wrote it down perhaps a few days after, but that's the regular Sfas Emes, the Sfas Emes we have in Tafresh Lamed Aleph. And it's worthwhile to know that the Sfas Emes will generally have 4 or 5 themes that he takes and goes with them from the beginning of the parsha all the way, from the beginning of Tafresh Lamed Aleph, all the way through 35 years. And if a person really wants to see and to recognize and to understand how the process of the Sfas Emes developed over the years that he was a Rebbe, you can look at in Tafresh Lamed Aleph, which is the first year, take a piece from there, how he understands the Medrash, and then go ahead and go in Tafresh Lamed Beis, Lamed Gimel, see where else throughout that parsha he discusses that Medrash, and it will give you the full gamut, the full picture of understanding how the Sfas Emes understood a Maimer Chazal, understood a Medrash, which is often something that he focuses on. This is the world of the Svarim of the Sfas Emes. Just to speak out, at the end of his life, he got sick, and he went ahead and he wanted to add on a name. So when he was thinking about what name to add on, he said, let me take back on the name that I had when I was young. And he brought back on the name of Yehuda. At this point, his father-in-law was already nifter. His first wife was already nifteris, and he was already remarried. And he gave back himself that name of Yehuda. And that's why we know him now as Yehuda Aryeh Leib ben Rabbi Mordcha, the Heilige Sfas Emes. He was nifter on Hei Shvat at the young age of 57, very heavily burdened by what was taking place in the war that was taking place, the Russian and the Japanese war that was taking place, where many of his Hasidim were affected by being drafted, by being a part of the war, and he felt spiritually very much affected by the tsar that his Hasidim were going through. As we said before, he was very much connected to every one of his Hasidim in a way of leiv and nefesh. He felt that tsar, and unfortunately was nifter at the age of 57, having a son, Rabbi Mordcha, who was obviously named after his father, go ahead and continue the dynasty of the Heilige Sfas Emes, which began at the Chedush Rim, continued with the Sfas Emes, and ultimately with the Imrei Emes continuing on after that with his children as well. This is a little bit of a glimpse into the world of the Sfas Emes. And just to mention maybe one last fact that I forgot to mention before, it's worthwhile noting that the name Sfas Emes was not given by the Sfas Emes. The Sfas Emes wrote these Torahs down, but it was not printed until after he was nifter. And the only reason why they chose the name Sfas Emes was because the last Torah that he said contains within it the words Sfas Emes Tikkun La'ad. Now, obviously, it wasn't just the last pasuk that he said, the last Torah that he wrote down, but it was also, as we said, the hallmark of the world of the Sfas Emes, to live in that world of Sfas Emes, to live with the truth of Kotsk, to be able to see things in a pneumistic way. Something that we've learned about so often throughout these Torahs that we learned in Sfas Emes is the ability the Sfas Emes has, and the Sfas Emes gives us over to see things in a pneumistic way. Nachitzonis, to see the Nekuda Achiyah Shebakol Davar, to see Shabbosdik, not weekday, to see as a ben, not as an eved, to see the pneumius, not the chitzonis. This is something that the world of the Sfas Emes is very much involved in. Tremendous amount of his Torah revolves around this idea of emes, but not just saying the truth as opposed to falsehood, but being able to see the world in a way of truth. And this is a little bit of the avodah of the Sfas Emes. Hashem should help by continuing to go ahead and to learn his Heilige Sfarim. We should be zeichet to be makasher ourselves to the Tzaddik, and Rich Hashem to continue learning and growing from his Torah, from his avodah, and Rich Hashem to be zeichet to the Geula Hashlema. Have a great Shabbos.